think green sand can be so elusive to people too. It's amazing when you go into somewhere and you see what you're doing with like literally just sand and bond. The green sand molding process basically takes sand that you might think of from a lake, and they extract it from the lake and they clean it and they make it into the sizing that we need for an appropriate casting. And then we'll take that sand, we'll add an additive called bond, and the bond contains several different materials. It contains bentonite clay in some form, either southern or western bentonite. It can often contain cereals or cellulose. It can contain sea coal, but basically additives that help improve the flowability, the strength, and other components of the green sand. And then finally, we'll take water, and the water is added in with that sand and with the bond. We basically are coating the sand grain with the bond and then adding the water to help activate that clay. And that gives you the ability for these sand grains, this green sand, to form together into a really strong mold. So then we'll take our pattern and we will put that with the green sand and apply pressure and create a mold. And the great benefit about green sand is that it's really reusable. We'll go through the system, it'll get shaken out and separated from the casting, and it will be reused over and over again. Every foundry has their own unique green sand blend, really dependent on their customers, the material that they're making, what kind of tolerances they have. We continuously maintain our sand system. Northern Iron and Machine in St. Paul, Minnesota has a green sand system. They have two separate systems, one for their DISA, one for their 30 square line. And then RMG Manufacturing in Anniston, Alabama has a green sand system that's shared between their lines. Green sand molding can create really good surface finishes, really good advantage of it. It also pulls away from the tooling really well. And in general, it's something that we can tune in. A green sand system is a living system. So we continuously monitor it, we continuously maintain the system, we test the sand system health, and it can be overlooked by a lot of foundries as a very critical part of the casting process. And green sand systems are mostly for higher production. Like, it's very rare to see green sand for 30 molds a day. It's mostly for things like when you have decimatics, you're going to be using a green sand system. When you have those kind of more consistent running mold machines versus floor molding, because it has to be used kind of relatively quickly. Like Furan, it can sit and then you mix it whenever you're going to use it, whereas the green sand system, you kind of have to keep running. The thing about Furan that's beneficial is that you can make the mold and it can sit for several days. And most green sand systems, you can't do that. If you make a mold, you're going to need to pour it within an hour or two, because the water will evaporate out and it'll lose its strength as soon as it loses moisture. So they're great for different purposes. And when you're making like a big mold for a really large part, like at Minster, and you need to put complex pores in it, and you need to double check and triple check that it's right, and you get one chance to do it, that's a really good application for Furan. But if you're making 10,000, even 1,000 parts in a year, and you want them all to be really geometrically similar, you want them manufactured quickly, you don't want to have a lot of costs and overhead, green sand molding is a really good opportunity for that. We look at tons of different properties in our green sand. We look at the methylene blue percentage is a specific test that we do to look at the amount of active clay in the system, which is the clay that can actually bond the sand grains together. We'll read things like the temperature. We'll take AFS clay measurements. We'll do sand screen tests, which help us look at the distribution of the sand grains across different screens and help us make sure that we have a good casting finish with just the right amount of fines to give you a smooth surface. Green sand is a really environmentally friendly molding material. It doesn't have any sort of off-gassing that happens when metal is poured into it. And it can also be reused almost infinitely until it's broken down into a really small size. The sand is continuously going around the system. The same sand grain going through a system 10 times or even more depending on where it is in the mold. Of course, if it's really close to the casting, it'll tend to break down quickly, but if it's farther away from the casting and that mold metal interface, it can be reused quite a long time in sand systems. So basically everything in the green sand system came from the earth at some point, right? So it's, sea coal and sand and bentonite clay, right? Maybe very little cereals that are man-made, but everything else is pretty much things that we found in the ground and then combined in the right way,